So firstly, are you able to hear me? Okay, great. So we'll firstly start off with kind of how the standard of the debate works, and then I might move on to my first argument. So in terms of definition and things like that, so basically say that in the event that I can prove that that beauty pageants do more harm than good, and that banning them in particular would be better than it would be worse, I think I can get up in this debate. I think that's a relatively simple standard. Good things are good, bad things are bad. And the second thing I'd just say, in terms of a definition, so a ban means that the government passes laws that prevent something from happening. That seems fairly clear. And beauty pageants are competitions, not exclusively for females, but generally for women, which aim to rank women and award prizes primarily on the basis of physical attractiveness. There can be other elements, but generally speaking, the primary one is physical attractiveness. I think we all know what a beauty pageant is. If you want to go into it more, I'm happy to do that. But other than that, I think it's pretty clear. So I'm just going to pass the mic over just so that you've got an opportunity. If you've got any problems with that or any clarification, we can do that before we get started.
Hey, I'm totally fine with your definition of what is a beauty pageant. The only contention I think I would hold is that beauty pageants, while awarded on the merit of physical attractiveness as one component, I would acknowledge that all beauty pageants have a standard and metric beyond just physical attractiveness. There is no beauty pageant that I have seen or heard of that you can only intend to in one criteria. You have to fit like an age group, an education level, and a social group or a cultural group as well. So beauty pageants, while yes, mainly merited on physical attractiveness, have many components. That's my only addition, but happy with your current definition. Happy to pass the mic back. But like most of the point is like, after that, I would say that like, if we were going to say that beauty pageants are wrong or are right, the ultimate burden is to prove that the government has a responsibility beyond like to change the status quo that beauty pageants cause more harm than they currently cause good in our current society. I would challenge the idea that like beauty pageants only cause harm. I would totally accept Tim's definition that beauty pageants are based on physical attractiveness, but I acknowledge that the government role would have to mean to win this debate, you'd have to acknowledge that all harms created in this world outweigh the benefits created by this world under the understanding we have in the current thing. Anyway, I'll pass it back.
Okay, so on net, more harm than good. Happy to talk about that. That seems to be nice and simple. And I'll get to things you were talking about it being about more than beauty. So like the age, education level, possibly ethnicity, things like that. I think that's actually a really, really important thing that we need to talk about because it's quite exclusive. So I'm happy to include that in the definition of beauty pageants because I don't think it's a particularly good thing for beauty pageants. With that in mind, to my first point. So I think that the first thing is that beauty pageants promote harmful stereotypes, and that's something that's really, really problematic about them and generally causes a harm. So it does this in two basic ways. The first of which is that it promotes a particularly narrow type of positive body image, right? So you look at the majority of people that participate in beauty pageants, you see the ones that get the most traction inside of the media. And you look at the way that they're generally presented, it's people that are like really skinny, have a kind of hourglass figure, are blonde, have symmetrical facial features, and so on and so forth. And this is something which, in reality, lots of people would find attractive, but lots of other people, like in fact most people, would find lots of other types of things attractive, right? So we don't think that this is like some natural objective standard. It's a subjective one, and it's one because people have an image of what a beauty pageant winner should be. Generally speaking, people that are able to meet that standard are able to do well, and that then provides something like theoretically provides an objective understanding of what beauty is. So if you win a beauty pageant, definitionally, a bunch of people have certified that they consider you to be beautiful. Now, I think that's really, really damaging because, like I said, that there isn't an objective standard of beauty. There are lots of different people that have lots of different body types, and that lots of different people find attractive. And I think it's really, really damaging on two levels to say that that's the standard. The first reason it's damaging is that people that don't meet that standard, and in particular can't meet that standard, it can be really, really hurt by this. So, you know, people that might be overweight, but also people that aren't especially tall or might not have symmetrical facial features, things like that. There's nothing to say that they are any better or worse looking than anyone else. That's a subjective thing, and it's a thing that different people would put different weight to. But if you say that there is an objective standard and you have competitions which attempt to measure that objective standard, that makes it much harder for those people to imagine themselves as physically attractive. I think that's something that's really damaging. That's particularly true when it comes to like beauty pageants around children, right? Because they might not have the analytic ability to realize that this is one particular standard which is somewhat unique. And the second harm that it has, like following on from that, it actually makes it harder for them then to consider themselves physically attractive and thus kind of get out in the world and have that sort of confidence. But I'm going to pass it to you now.
Okay, I'm really glad that you brought up child beauty pageants as your main point when you also brought up the negative harms that we most commonly see in the media of being like the blonde hourglass bombshell. I think when we think of child beauty pageants, it's universally accepted that the most popular and like famous paid child beauty pageant isn't actually like in anyone's definition of stereotypically beautiful is Honey Boo Boo. She is an overweight child who has won multiple beauty pageants purely by proving she is different. Beauty pageants have stereotypically norms, but we see that beauty pageants are a huge catalyst for change throughout, changing norms, changing body styles. We've seen the introduction of muscle women. We've seen the introduction of things like child beauty pageants where talent shows, personality things do weight in more. We also have seen huge social changes across like international markets and international social groups where beauty pageants have happened and like the stereotypical ethnicity look has been challenged. Like we saw with Miss Singapore, she was of a mixed race. That changed the national image of what should be considered beautiful in that country. Yes, there was outrage. Yes, there were people who claimed that she shouldn't represent that country, but there was just as much outrage saying that she should represent that country because the country has a changing face. Beauty pageants do have norms, but those norms change as society changes. As in most aesthetic-based things, the idea that competition and like sometimes your sense of self, because you are not 6 foot tall or blonde or an hourglass figure, means that you're eliminated from beauty pageants and that ipso facto society tells you you're not beautiful isn't true, right? It tells you that you don't compete in that specific beauty pageant. But there are beauty pageants for tatted up, old-looking girls. There are beauty pageants for big and curvy. And while those beauty pageants may not be the main traction that we're getting, we see through examples such as Honey Boo Boo that like beauty pageants can be a catalyst for change and changing the way we societally accept beauty and help people promote self-love and like personality and change the images they have of themselves and of their communities. So I'd argue that yes, there are some harms if you only take beauty pageants as this stagnant image from like 1991. But if we look at the common case and that we're currently faced with beauty pageants, we see that beauty pageants change every year. We see additions made to the market and they get more funding. So I'd argue the government has an onus to say that those things are worse for our community than better for our community, because I think Honey Boo Boo being like a chubby, happy little girl is a better image for beauty pageants and our society than it is for, say, anorexic stereotypes that Tim's trying to present as is the norm.
I would make the point here, and just on what you were saying, so I think that there's two levels of rebuttal. The first of which is to say that yes, there are alternative types of beauty pageants, and yes, I'm sure that in some instances they are quite empowering, but by and large they are marginal, right? They are smaller competitions. They are ones that don't receive as much publicity. It's more difficult to enter into them. To be frank, if you're the kind of person that's entering into this kind of competition, you might not be the sort of person that would benefit the most from going into that sort of competition, because likely you're already involved in the kind of activist spaces or social spaces that would give you the analytic skills to be able to recognize physical beauty outside of that paradigm that I was talking about earlier, right? That's a really, really marginal thing. There aren't a huge number of people that are involved in those sorts of things. And the second thing, you know, you talked about Honey Boo Boo, you talked about, and then you talked about, you know, people going into like tatted up or plus size beauty pageants and stuff like that. And it's really, really important here to recognize that most people that engage with beauty pageants don't do it on the level of performance. They do it on the basis of viewership, right? And so then you have to look at how those people are actually perceived, right? Honey Boo Boo isn't looked at as someone that is like a standard for beauty. She is mocked as what happens when white trash fails to raise children, right? Like the iconic image of Honey Boo Boo is like her running around in like half ruined clothes, eating chicken nuggets or something, right? She's not actually someone that is looked up as an idol, right? Like even if she was, that would be really, really weird because she's a child, and it's really bizarre that we would try to place beauty standards on children. It seems really uncomfortable to me. But like, even if that was a good thing, that's not how she's presented, right? Most people that are involved, that know about her not as a beauty pageant winner, but as a freak, right? So the fact that she wins is actually really, really harmful. And the fact that like, there's this system which puts people that sit outside of that norm and then make fun of them in a really public way is something that's really, really damaging. And the second thing then is that people who engage in beauty pageants like on a really casual level and view them get two things out of them. The first is generally people don't look at the kind of alternative ones, right? Like the biggest, best publicized beauty pageants are things like Miss Universe, which is absolutely based on conventional standards of beauty, right? And the second thing that comes about is people engaging in like those clips, you know, like in South Carolina, like really fucking up a question, right? And stuffing up her response to something about international policy, right? That has two things. The first of which is that it reinforces those standards of beauty because, of course, those people on those shows are really conventionally attractive. And the second thing it does is presents the idea that women are successful and are able to be successful without being intelligent because clearly they're getting by on attractiveness.
So I think it's really interesting that like you say that the stereotypical image of Honey Boo Boo is like this disgusting like white trash analytical. If that was true, we would like say that like if that was the only way we'd be introduced to her, that would be really interesting. I'm totally happy to concede that is the way we see her, right? I will not concede that no one knows it's from child beauty pageants. And I think it's really important that I won't concede that, right? Because people who hold on to that notion and narrative, which would be the majority of America and the majority of people who watch that show, they understand that like she's breaking a trend. I think it's also really interesting that you didn't touch on any of the cultural change that can be affected through beauty pageants on a national forum. You brought up Miss Universe. Miss Universe is a competition from national rank, like national internal competitions. So like to acknowledge that like Miss Universe is the most popular forum, you also have to acknowledge that like national competitions do affect like internal change, because the fact is, like, to get to that level, to be on the most popular platform, we have seen changing stereotypes to get there, right? So internal nationalism and the way people view themselves has been hit. So, like, you didn't address any of that, which I think says that, like, beauty pageants do have a benefit that the government has no reason to meddle with, firstly. Secondly, the idea that, like, the most, like, static idea of beauty pageants is, as the one most consumed, is that of the Miss Universe archetype. I would challenge that ultimately because I think it depends who is consuming your characterization of the consumer of beauty industry. Now, I ultimately think beauty pageants are given to people as an option growing up in communities where they need financial support. So the most popular communities where there are beauty pageants are things such as local small town America. We see them in like small European countries, they're very popular. You see them in small South American countries, very popular. These become an option for people to like socially move and elevate themselves. And yes, while there is an aesthetic thing that excludes some parts of the community, there are options throughout the whole society where you are able to like access your niche to get ahead. And I would argue that the government has no right or responsibility to remove someone's upward mobility just because they're pretty, right? People are allowed to be just athletic and get into university on scholarships in America under this status quo too. If you would remove all points in which people self-elevate, I would argue, and self-promote and make themselves feel better about themselves and their self-image and ego is improved, I would take that as the role of government. That would be unrealistic. You'd have to remove sporting scholarships. You'd have to remove the idea that you can award people on heaps of merits, but beauty itself, in these communities, beauty pageants are used as a tool for the people who are engaging with it. And I say that because of the characterization of who engages with beauty pageants in your argument.
Okay, so let's firstly talk about the cultural change stuff, then the kind of elevation-y sort of stuff, and then I'll get some substantive in. So the first thing is on the cultural change stuff. So you talked about Miss Singapore being an interracial person, that shifting conceptions of beauty. So the first thing is, for every example like that, which I suppose might be a bit of a win, I guess, you have every time that the norm is upheld, that does a degree of damage, right? And it's really, really telling that, you know, nearly every, in fact, like pretty much every Miss America has been like a white blonde lady, right? And so every time that happens, that reinforces that standard. It's not like that's something which just sits there like inert, and then if something outside the norm happens that's helpful, right? There's an active harm that's being done, and then every once in a while, if you get a bit of a win, that doesn't go far enough in counterbalancing the harm. The next thing I'd say is that on this, like you talked about interracial people, sorry, just on this final thing, you talked about interracial people. Generally speaking, interracial people are like really likely to be considered conventionally attractive anyway, because they're more likely to have facial symmetry and all those sorts of things, right? Like there's a reason that lots of interracial people are really, really big as models in China, right? It's because they're able to get that kind of they're able to get a bigger section of society thinking that they represent them. The second thing is you talked about the idea that people that engage in these are like from small towns, they don't have much money, they're able to like socially move around, they're able to elevate themselves, get self-esteem. The people that primarily get these benefits are people that are really anyway. We think those people could get them out of other things, right? Like attractive people have lots of opportunities to elevate themselves and boost up their self-esteem, conventionally attractive people. And the second thing is that, so we don't think they particularly need it, and it harms people that don't win those, right? So you enter into it, you have to spend a bunch of money. If you're someone that isn't conventionally attractive and thinks they can win, you end up blowing a bunch of money, feeling like shit, and like giving functionally some of your money to someone that was probably going to be fine anyway, because they were able to like leverage their physical, like conventional attractiveness to some advantage anyway. So then I just wanted to talk quickly about how this reinforces the patriarchy and why we think that's harmful. So like, firstly, this is just like an old bunch of white guys. Like generally speaking, these competitions slant towards older people. They're more likely to be male than the people competing in the competition. They're more likely to have particular conceptions of what beauty is. And then leading on from that, those are people that are then engaging in commodifying and ranking women, right? Like, as I said, the vast majority of these competitions is predicated on the idea that physical attractiveness trumps anything else, right? Like answering questions or like doing an activity or something. Those are absolutely secondary activities to physical attractiveness, right? We think that commodification is really, really difficult. And we think that the fact that it comes from a particular place is something that's really, really damaging, right? And I just add here then that like a lot of the time, so you said that there's you know, differentiated by like age or by education or whatever. We think that segregation is really, really bad because that segregation is something, actually I'll just pass it, I'll talk to you later about that.
So I think it's really interesting that you talk about like attractive people have generally better advantages and they can actively source those out. So the other places attractive people generally can leverage their attractiveness are in more harmful scenarios than I would give you than beauty pageants, right? So if you are like someone who could win a Miss Universe competition, someone who could leverage that beauty in a different industry or forum, you'd probably leverage it towards the adult industry, which is like, hey, get your clothes off, or leverage it towards like the cosmetic beauty industry, which is like far more competitive, far more harmful, have far less standards for education and social norms, which means like you can't be like if you're telling pretty people, don't go to a beauty pageant, go leverage your beauty other ways. I say there are more harms leveraging your beauty and modeling at the adult industry, going and trying to like just charm people, right? Opposed to legitimizing that you are leveraging yourself as a pretty person has far more social benefit than saying you're leveraging yourself in far more harmful pretty people industries, right? I say that at the best case, I'd rather people who are pretty go into beauty competitions to leverage their pretty if they are going to do it. And I argue that leveraging your beauty at any point isn't as inherently harmful as Tim would take you to accept, right? Leveraging physical attributes is done throughout society and since the dawn of time. The point of beauty pageants, why they are less harmful than these other means of leveraging, is that they have, while lesser components, people can't go in and enter if they are rabid drug users, which like Kate Moss made cocaine chic a thing. There are more harms to the beauty norms created external to beauty pageants than internal to beauty pageants. And because there is static norms within beauty pageants, as Tim would have you accept. But in fact, beauty pageants are capable of change far faster than these other forms to leveraging your beauty. I would argue that it's totally acceptable. On the point of the patriarchy and the commodification of women, I would always say that like making women an object would be inherently negative. Everyone in society understands the patriarchy is a bad thing. What I wouldn't accept is that when women self-enter into a competition, that they are these aimless creatures that don't understand what they're doing and don't want to do it for their own self-fulfillment, and that feeling shitty would be a worse enough harm, that competing in any forum, whether or not you win or lose, may make you feel shitty. But we do not say that boys are doing it and are like subject to like hyper-masculinity when they compete in like muscle building or in a sporting forum, because we understand that like people do things because they want to feel good about themselves, and that is a good enough harm, a good enough benefit, so that like in our side. Like I've got 10 seconds left, but I would also say that the idea that it's just old white men, again, notions of the idea that beauty pageants are inherently static.
So let's just talk. So you firstly said that like people will leverage their attractiveness through prostitution or the adult industry or modeling or whatever. So I would dispute that on the basis that so that could be one way that you would do it. I would not be happy that you would do it. I would like also, following on from this, support a whole bunch of other restrictions to make sure that those kind of industries are exploitation free as possible. But also there's a hell of a lot of social science that says that people that have symmetrical facial features and are like conventionally attractive by societal standards are more likely to be considered trustworthy, they're more likely to be considered competent, they're more likely to be considered intelligent, right? So I'm talking about that leveraging. It's like, it's using the other set of skills you have and then complementing that with physical attractiveness and being able to use that to get a beneficial outcome, right? That's actually how this would work in reality. I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that everyone that's denied the ability to win a beauty pageant ends up becoming a porn star. That's just not how this sort of stuff would work. The second thing you said is that like objectification isn't necessarily harmful. We would say that objectification is harmful if it's done in a way that prioritizes beauty over everything else, right? And that's what beauty pageants do, right? It's not objectifying like in a small section of the competition and then like measuring up other skills. That's nearly the entirety of what the point of it is. And it's not being objectified by people that are your peers. It's by people that are older than you, that probably have different life experiences to you, right? And we think that at that point it does become harmful. And then you said that like we don't ban guys from bodybuilding or sport or whatever. And it's actually really interesting that you note that, because bodybuilding in particular is a really, really good example of a difference, because bodybuilding doesn't focus on physical attractiveness. It focuses on the achievement of putting on muscle, right? So like no one goes like, oh my God, like that bodybuilder's so hot. They look really weird. And the whole point is that they're able to like put on muscle and lose fat in a way that's really, really difficult, right? That's why I would support like muscle building competitions for women and stuff like that, because that is something that's based on achievement as opposed to based on like inert characteristics and objectification, right? Bodybuilders, like the whole point is that they work super hard. That's how they're marketed. And that's the main appeal of it. So then the next thing I'd say is that this fetishizes youth in a way that we think is really, really damaging. So you made the point that like these are often segregated by age bracket. It is true that most consumption of these occurs from people who, most of the consumption occurs of beauty pageants from people that are say like 16, 17, 18, up to about 25. That's by far the most popular thing, the popular group of beauty pageants in terms of consumption. I think it's important here to notice that there's a split between people that are participating in beauty pageants and the harms that occur to them, and the harms that occur to and implicit messages from beauty pageants. That is like most people that consume them casually, right? And we think that the fact that like most coverage focuses on a very narrow band of people with very narrow looks and a very narrow age.
So what I would think is really interesting is like the main tension in your case that I've found so far is like you argue that we can't have beauty pageants because it makes like the people who lose feel shitty about themselves, but ultimately it's worse for society because we're also elevating these people who are just because of the merits of their physical beauty. But when we do have the most popular consumed things that we see, like gaffes of dumb bimbos messing up, so it's like we know they're smart but they're dumb, so we're not really like into it, and white trash honey boo boo. What I argue is this, that for a government to make the case that beauty pageants should be banned, they have to argue that the harms to those participating and consuming are greater than the benefits gained by society. I don't see in any point of your case have you told me where social change is social change affected by beauty pageants should be eliminated under your norm. Under the norm, we currently status quo. We currently already have heaps of things make people feel shitty and elevate the pretty to a superficial level. Beauty pageants aren't the most consumed level of bad things for 17 to 25-year-olds or like young people actively consuming beauty pageants and the messaging of beauty pageants, right? If you look at beauty pageants, they're a very small section of the aesthetic industry, right, where we promote pretty as a culture. If you take the fact that it is such a small part of the community and that you're telling me that people can just leverage it socially and you're going to put a heaps of restrictions in so they can't go into the adult industry or whatever, I would argue that this is like preposterous for the government to propose. Second of all, I would argue that like beauty pageants provide such minor harms to society as a whole because of the way we do see these gaffes, because of the way we do see Honey Boo Boo, that we know that these people are getting rewarded just because of their aesthetic. What I argue, and why I do not believe the government has any role to ban beauty pageants, is that while beauty pageants under Tim's model are the static thing, under my argument, beauty pageants affect more change and create more positive goods to people participating in them. They teach people that discipline. You bring up building as like this idea that they gain mass and they lose mass. The idea that someone wakes up one morning and walks into a beauty pageant with no prep, no preparation, no aesthetic building, no brand imaging, no modeling experience is absurd, right? You don't just get rewarded on like the fact that your mom and dad have good DNA. You get rewarded on the fact of how you present, how you walk, how you pose. I think these skills are things that you are just undercutting. These things in beauty pageants that contribute to the winner. If we do take you at your best case that it's just like the blonde bimbo, there are 30 of those competing, and what actually takes someone over the line is the skill set presented within those forums, such as posing, modeling, presentation, speech, costuming, and those skill sets are just as valid, if not more so, like because they have a whole level of artistry that like you're just undervaluing for the sake of your case.
Okay, so I've got 1:38 left. So just firstly on this last thing that people have to work to win these. So that might be true, but that's not how it's presented, right? The idea is just that these people rock up, you never see the work that goes, never made mention of like, oh, they worked really hard on their makeup or whatever, right? It's just assumed that someone does it for them. And the presentation is that their genes did do it. So the harm that exists is the harm that goes to the majority of the community, which are the people that see it. The way it's presented isn't that people work for it, it's just that they were naturally lucky. So you talked about social change and you said that I haven't responded to it. The point that I made was that every time that there isn't one of these like pie in the sky, like Miss Singapore types of things, the status quo is reinforced because conventional beauty norms are reinforced in a way that we think is damaging. That's what I spent a lot of time talking about, right? And so we think that like even if you were able to prove that there were some instances where social change was affected, every time that that doesn't happen, we go backwards, right? And we go backwards a lot more than we go forwards, right? And so then on that, I talked about how there were harmful stereotypes that exist inside of this, inside of beauty pageants, and that those harmful stereotypes are reinforced by them, and they're encouraged by the fact that the people that are judging them tend to be older and have a more conventional understanding of beauty norms, of attractiveness, than the community as a whole does. In addition, this commodifies women, it objectifies them. It says that attractiveness sits above everything else, right? And the fact that the majority of presentation of beauty pageant, because they're attractive, means that people are more likely to view women as people that are like predicated on attractiveness. We think that's bad.
So I've got 1:30 left now. I want to conclude my case by saying that beauty pageants should remain like as the status quo presented under my case as tools of social change where women come up and do change the national imagery through a national identity. I also present that beauty pageants have this idea that they do present the work involved, that the characterization that Tim presents to you is like that we don't see any of the effort put in. The fact is one of the most viewed components of the Miss Universe is behind the scenes with the girls. So we do know for a fact, and like the training days leading up to it, we do know for a fact that there is an effort put into it. I challenge the characterization that beauty pageants inherently rest on the laurels of like these people are inherently born perfect and are merely rewarded for the way they are born, as Tim would like to characterize it. Ultimately, the government has no role to change the status quo and ban beauty pageants because they have not proven that the social harm of the back step for every social change forward exists. I argue that like for every step forward is a step forward, because those people, like young biracial girls, do see that. Young Singaporean women did have a change of what they had to accept. I argue that like beauty pageants present an option for a lot of young members of the community to enter into any form of competition, and competition isn't inherently bad, no matter what like the predication is, and it is beyond just the aesthetic.